The indelible ink written on the heart of the Shuna Sela, or the beautiful soul in Hegel, is it? So let's ask: is this merely text, or is it das Ding an sich? So this supposed permanence or durability of the utterance, and so let's interpret that in the sense of we're trying to gain a radical access to Dasein. So Dasein is said to be that one being that has for its essencing, or how should we say this in line with when Heidegger's talking about the holding sway. The holding sway is the Waltung, or well, let's leave it at the holding sway is the Waltung. What's Waltung? It's related to the English word wielding. So one wields a sword. The guy Cecil Brown once, having a keen sense of language, was within earshot of something I said about one of our chess players, Howard, who was once upon a time he was a linebacker in his youth, and I called him blunderbuss. The word blunder, of course, being a common word for mistake in chess. But he asked me, "Oh, what's a blunderbuss?" And I said, "Well, I'm just using it to mean something large and unwieldy." And then after a moment, I remembered. I said, "I think it was originally had something to do with a gun." And then he quoted the details. It was originally some kind of Dutch wide-barreled gun or something like that. But one could say the unwieldy goes along with the unwieldy thing goes along with the wielding, and so the Waltung, or the wielding of the essence of things is in question with the Dasein, according to Heidegger. But this is one of Dasein's modes of intelligibility, or everything we just said was said, and if you didn't speak English, you would have no access to it, except, well, if you spoke German, you might have you would have understood a couple isolated words, maybe. But if my pronunciation wasn't too poor, or if it didn't come too much out of the blue for it to be intelligible for you. But so let's consider this. Let's try to gain access to this problem from the point of view of Hegel. And so Hegel is offering a specific formula for what's happening with the to superimpose on him Heidegger's Waltung, or I keep wanting to say somehow Entwaltung, or no, that doesn't make sense. So the going away from the wielding, but his version, Hegel's version, let's see within the horizon again of imposing another intelligibility out. So what I'm doing right now is I'm grabbing from all different regions of history, taken chronologically. I'm acting against what actually happened in the time sequence, and imposing ideas that came later on thinkers who came earlier. But taken from ourselves, they all, obviously we have access to all of them. And then one might explode from that, the problem of presentism. Why aren't we always thrusting these ideas into the so-called chronology of things, the so-called clock time or chronos time, where possibly the other Greek time, the sort of comic timing time of I always forget what the other one's called, Chronos, and I know it, but it doesn't come to my mind readily. But anyway, the time of opportunity, the other concept that the ancient Greeks had of time associated with, especially with timing in front of a crowd, with rhetoric, with, like Trump, when he was suddenly faced in the first election cycle. I mean, Trump had run for office a number of times, and lost. But in the primary, where he shined so well, because it's basically I guess the reason he shined so well in the primary is because he knows what his audience wants. So he knew his audience wanted to attack a certain form of Democrats, and then when I think it was Katie Couric quizzed him and said, "Well, you've said all these made all these misogynistic remarks in the past," and then he said, "I've only made one misogynistic remark, and that was to call Rosie O'Donnell a dog," or something like that. And then the crowd burst out and cheers, because he knew that this is the target of that political crowd, was people like Rosie O'Donnell, and then more broadly people like Hillary Clinton. So I mean, I knew a party apparatchik at the time who was so obsessed with Hillary Clinton, he was constantly following the orders from the party from the apparat to attack the great enemy, Hillary Clinton. And so he would constantly come out with the phrases that made no sense outside of the choir, like Hillary Clinton is having a lesbianic affair with one of her assistants. Hillary Clinton has syphilis of the. He kept repeating Hillary Clinton has syphilis of the brain, and then other things of the like matter that is just were totally outrageous from a normal point of view, but they sell to that crowd, right? So I mean, that's what Trump is. I think that's why Trump excels more in the primary than in the open election, but he still uses the same appeal to rhetorical power, to the rhetorical mocked and the political mocked in the terms of that the singing to the choir. I think that's the reason why, even if it was just a lapsus when he says intelligent people don't like me, I think that's a good explanation for why intelligent people don't like him, because he appeals all the time to things that don't really make sense if you think them through, unless you think, I mean, that's not totally obvious, unless you think saying the thing your country wants, say that a political party could be by a metamorphosis become a whole country, then maybe that is intelligent. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing about maybe any attempt to be Socratic and go outside what the Athenians actually want is the tragic error and the mistake. So what Hegel tries to do is, he says every time there's this tragic error and mistake like this, where you go outside the party to the so-called intelligence, in the sense that Trump says intelligent people don't like me, then according to Hegel's version, there's a productive power in play. There's something which isn't it doesn't fit in with the Thomistic picture, or the picture of Averroes. It's a new thing. It's the attempt to say Geist is a productive power. It's part of the species being. It's part of the how is that species being called? Gattungswesen or something like that. It's part of this species being, which is somehow productive within history. That's where Hegel essentially differs from Aristotle, even though the followers of Hegel constantly harp on the duplication of Aristotle in Hegel. And so if we look at, now just think about it this way, where that whole account of the Geist, and so Socrates is carrying a certain Geist, and it comes into tragic contest with other Geists, and it's bursting out of the country of the Athenians, just as Trump refuses in a certain way to burst out of the audience that he understands best, and always sort of caters to that, and therefore is considered non-Odyssean or he doesn't go on odysseys like that, on odysseys of thought. He doesn't go on Captain Cook odysseys of discovering unknown land masses after drifting about 1,000 miles. He sticks with immediate, effective, efficacious speech acts. And this is what makes him, in a certain way, appear strong. So we have here a specific picture of how this comes forward in history, and then if we take that seriously, then that informs our intelligibility according to Hegel, and then therefore our Dasein. Our basic intelligibility has given by the enduring power of almost material power of speech, because it's a productive power. Then we understand something different than what Heidegger understands by Dasein in a certain way, because in Heidegger we have to do some kind of Gelassenheit, or being at ease with things. Agamben says he's not at ease with the situation with global English. For instance, he said whatever he gives a talk, something is necessarily lost because he has to speak in English. It's not the same. It's interesting that he points out it's not the same as Latin, which was a dead language, and which wasn't the language of any. Italian and Latin are the same language, even though French and Italian are ancestors of Latin. So there was nobody that was native Latin speakers in the Middle Ages when that became the lingua franca of the university. It wasn't the lingua franca of politics. As soon as there was a lingua franca of politics, it's very interesting, it was the French, the diplomatic language. And in those days, diplomats had to be almost philosophers, because they got to travel a long way, and then they had to be able to not just be a phonograph before its time, or a bad tape recorder, but they had to actually interact and talk a lot with the heads of state and your excellencies that they came into contact with. So they had to sort of know their doctrines, know their policies, know their political policies. So taken that way, this not being at ease of Agamben is really in the context of globalized English, where it says French was a native language only of the French, when in those times when French was the diplomatic language of all of Europe. And then I guess the Russians, I suppose, actually some of them took on French very early, maybe to counteract that. Probably, I don't know, maybe from the time of Catherine the Great. I'm not sure exactly when that flourished the most. I think some of the czars, almost their first language was French rather than Russian. Almost. I think it was more like, if they had to express anything complicated, they would prefer to say it in French. If they had to talk to the servants, they'd say it in Russian. But again, been saying, and I think what he means is, I don't have this Glossen, or I can't just be at ease. I don't have this Gelassenheit. I'm not at ease in this situation, because I can't just speak in Italian. I have to speak in the global English, and then therefore something's always lost. So that's one version of sort of Dasein being getting this Edward Said Palestinian treatment where they say, Edward Said used to say, for them it's just like breathing, something like that. This is not his exact words, but it's like, for us, it's always a struggle to have our media being heard, our narrative being heard, our existence being expressed, our intelligibility coming into Weltung, or to be wielded just in a way that's at ease. This will take us into all kinds of sort of deep pits, the slimy bodies, or maybe of snakes. Could sort of menace us, and we would have to go into the problem of Meister Eckhart and the loss and hate and all this stuff, so I don't propose to go into that right at this moment, but instead only to, it's almost necessary, but I don't want to go into it just at this moment. Let's just look at quickly so we have the Hegelian version, and here's how we'll do it. So let's look at, if we have Hegel's problem of the Schöne Seele, or the beautiful soul. What does that mean? So let's make a quick version. It's not really what Hegel spells out in the sections where it's like subsection 600 and something, 637 or something like that. For a number of sections, he's talking about the beautiful soul, but he's doing it in his he's doing it in the terms of his claim about how the absolute spirit is produced through this process of the universal world history and the Geist moving along it, and he's showing the phenomenology of I should say the phenomenology. That's actually a bad translation, right? Phenomenology of Geist. It really should be phenomenology according to Geist. That's more clear. That's what he means. So what's the point? Is that we only see things according to our position in history. But then this assumes the basic intelligibility of the being tied to this question of progress in history. And then this is a specific version of it in Hegel. So the beautiful soul would be, let's understand it as the most encompassing soul. So this is the way Jung talks, is like certain personalities contain other personalities, and then so you have a Matryoshka doll. Just think of a Matryoshka doll, and then you have the smaller ones within. So the beautiful soul is the largest, but it's the largest exactly within that stage of world history. So in a way, we could analogize that to Trump when he's talking in 2015 to the run-up to the party where we have from George Samueli, by the way, this sort of poeticized, it's a very beautiful poetic version of what happened in the 2015 Republican primary, where Huckabee, so he gives it, so to Huckabee he changes what Huckabee says and changes the anecdote a little bit, but it has a poetic truth that's greater than what actually happened. And what he says is, so Huckabee, when asked by one of the moderators, what's this election all about? And then Huckabee says, what this election is about is responsible politicians are making a comeback, and those who only have the interest of aggrandizement, those who only have the interest of widening their personal financial holdings, those who only have the interest in self-promotion. Those who only have and he went on, and then you could see Donald Trump was fuming. So this is the way Samueli tells the story. I've changed it slightly too. It's a telephone game. You could look at it, what he originally said, Huckabee originally said, if you look it up and all that. But so Trump is fuming, and he's like, it's as though Huckabee is saying, there's the response. So at that time, there was a movement from some of the old conservatives, maybe Richard Epstein types or whatever, to say Richard Epstein actually supported Trump, so I shouldn't falsely incriminate him that way. But I use that because I just think he's more has greater respect for intellectual honesty than does Trump. Right, he goes beyond, and there's a bunch of people that were from this Socratic school of conservatives that had a greater respect for intellectual honesty than Trump, who says intelligent people don't like me, who represented this group of intelligent people that don't like him, but from within the sort of core of the conservatives, and not necessarily either neocons or, not talking about like Kagan or somebody, or even any of these other guys, Crystal or these people, but there were some guys that said, no, we can't, we have to put our foot down. So it seemed like what Huckabee was saying is there's these responsible politicians that really take things seriously, and then there's Trump. But then Huckabee said, and of course, I'm talking about Hillary Clinton. So of course Hillary Clinton turns out to be and then the crowd before the Republican primary burst out in cheer because their enemy has been put down. So it turned out to be Huckabee was making an elaborate appeal to political exegesis and to rhetoric, to the power of political rhetoric. Rhetoric isn't necessarily a pejorative. It seems like a pejorative partially when you simply act as though it were outside of philosophy, but there's also philosophic rhetoric as much as there is political and demotic rhetoric. You could apply and in fact Heidegger does apply the concept of rhetoric much more broadly in his book on truth and logic. The subject of rhetoric as treated by Aristotle shows the seriousness of the subject. You could look at that in Leo Strauss's seminar, by the way, which is on tape on the University of Chicago website. But in any case, so let's go back to the issue. You have countries or political parties or claques that all have one view, and then you have this beautiful soul born within them who is the widest, the largest personality of that type. But their tendency is to be loyal to that type. Their tendency is to be, one can say this type, let's give a sort of rhetorical presentation of the beautiful soul. The beautiful soul is exalted but never arrogant. Exalted but not arrogant. So that would be a characteristic of the beautiful soul. I mean, somebody like, well, I guess Trump himself. Somebody like Trump may be exalted in some way, but he's also arrogant. He's at a high altitude, right? The beautiful soul is fearless, but they're not out of control. That's not that pithy of a way to put it, but something like that. Another way to put it is the beautiful soul is extroverted to the full extent in the moment, quick, but they're also introverted to the full extent, withdrawn, gazing, looking upon things. The beautiful soul is the full expression of the people in this sense. So then, what's Hegel's problem here is that the beautiful soul is totally particular in that sense. It totally represents, in Trump, you could see it in Trump. It just he knows how to represent the particular demands of a particular group. And in fact, Huckabee did the same thing, just in a more, he circulated around for a while. He made, it took a little circumnavigation of his rhetoric, but he came out with the same thing. The appeal of us versus them, the enemy, is represented by Rosie O'Donnell and by Hillary Clinton, and then he played on that because he knew that's what everyone wanted to hear in that room. There's a loud burst of cheers, so that was kind of obvious, but it took a good. The timing had to be right in the remarks, right? And in Trump's case, actually, he was just didn't even know I mean, I suppose he might have known in advance and been primed for the fact that they were going to say something about misogyny and that he could deflect it to Rosie O'Donnell. Maybe he knew that in advance. But in any case, let's go on with the basic concept. The basic concept is there's somebody who's the most representative of the country or of something, of Athens, let's say. And then, so maybe, other people were probably more representative of Athens than Socrates, so far as Athens wasn't considered as the city of Athena where philosophy is the thing. But if philosophy is the thing, then there's this hatching out of the head of Zeus happening within the polis itself, which is more representative of the polis. But the beautiful soul has this problem in Hegel that it's perfect according to the standards of that time, or of that people, or of that political party, or whatever it is. But I think what he wants to say is just for that reason, there could be a problem with its dialectics. The other way to say the beautiful soul, I guess, is to say this is a person who's not grudging but generous. This is a person who's shows all the normal, healthy characteristics of a good character. But then again, it's a good. But what Hegel is saying is like a good character within a specific society. So a good character within the antebellum South would appear radically defective by the standards of people today, insofar as they basically thought slavery was unobjectionable because everybody in that culture did, and even if they were against it, they weren't against it in a way where they didn't consider themselves at war with it. They didn't consider it simply beyond. I mean, they didn't have a. I guess I think of the example of POW. A POW thinks it's his duty to try to escape. This isn't always the case with somebody who's imprisoned or with prisoners, right? The prisoners, sometimes they think the society is in some way justified in the imprisonment. There's not an obvious sense that somebody imprisoned has the duty to escape. And in the same way, there's, for the beautiful soul, there's not, say there was a full personality in that sorry, I'm butchering the pronunciation of the Russian doll. In that Russian doll sense, if you're in antebellum South, you wouldn't think, oh, I have to get rid of slavery at all costs. Even no matter how good of character you are, no matter how perfect a human being you are. So there's this idea that in Hegel's system of it's not a biological idea, but it's an idea of the Geist that's sort of character without flaws, but its only flaw is that it's modified by the level of the development of the Geist at that time. So then you could see a problem is, which is sort of, there's a convenient alibi to get out of it. It was like, now say you have the mystery of the beautiful soul, but within that culture, the people aren't going to be able to see outside of that, except the people that would be problematic personalities within that culture, and that because they would be exposed to the dialectical forces and the outside tragic forces. If Pericles is a perfect Athenian, then obviously Socrates opposes Pericles by saying, oh, that Pericles is a mere trump or the mere political man, and I, Socrates, am the man that's breaking us out of this system. So we come to this problem where Hegel tries to put a stop to it, but just merely by saying our time, the High Prussian time, somehow there could be a constitutional monarchy under the liberal principle of Friedrich de Grosse that hearken to the word of the law, but discuss and argue all you want. It's kind of like, I think if you're in the military and then you're given a command, you're not supposed to discuss and argue. You're just supposed to do that. There's some small tract on that about somebody that has to deliver a letter or something. I forget what that's called, that they give to the guys in the army. Which basically has the moral that just follow orders, because then things get done. Don't make a big fuss. And then there's the beautiful little presentation of it in a short book, which has something to do with Cuba, I think, with delivering a letter to Cuba. I forget the name of the guy. It's sounds like a Hispanic name or something. I forget. But in any case, you're not supposed to argue, right? So, but Friedrich de Grosse said you have to hearken to the law, but you can argue, you can have other views. This is sort of I think, why Hegel is a liberal and why this is supposed to be a big transformation in everything. The end of the military order and the beginning of the liberal order. That's one way to understand the beginning of liberalism. But of course, there's all different kinds of ways. So let's bookend it this way. So this is totally insufficient, what I've just sort of glossed, but maybe it gives some avenues of invasion. But in Nietzsche, there's a view that says the Willzumacht, or the will to power, is actually to be explicated by the further observation that will to power is actually a form of the Wille zum Willen, or the will to will. And so what that means is, say somebody wants to understand the world in a certain way that makes them, say, start the perpetual motion machine in this way so that it will go on. Like, what's my example? That Financial Times years ago came out with an article in their salmon sheets that said the strange thing about Steinway pianos is that their motto is there's nothing to be improved upon, and in striking contradistinction to everything else that exists in the commercial world. So yeah, that principle that there should be this eternal return of the same, remembering that the eternal return of the same is much more important to Nietzsche than this late idea of the will to mock, which is just sort of tagged on it from the outside. The eternal recurrence of the same is the central teaching of Zarathustra, and Zarathustra is kind of like Nietzsche as a god, Nietzsche transforming himself into a god as the text of the Zarathustra. Um, so we have there tacked on to that this saying that there must be a will to power which wills forever this teaching of the eternal return to come back and back again. But then on top of that, there's this extra sort of meta concern that the villain, or the will to will, is what's actually being willed. At bottom, the will to will is being willed, and once there's will, the eternal recurrence of the same is willed. But what does that mean for Hegel? It means that Hegel is in effect willing his whole doctrine that the end of history comes at during his own time, or during at the moment when it becomes rational to permit that one reason in public, rather than having this situation like in Book 2 of the Iliad, when Odysseus, who we should remember is the closest Homeric figure to Socrates, in which Plato analogizes or opens a kind of metonymic causeway on in his Gorgias, because they have to go down into the Hades, like Odysseus went down into Hades in order to talk to the sophist. Said in the Gorgias, I'm sorry, that's it's in the Protagoras, isn't it? I think it's in the Protagoras. But in any case, there's a connection between Socrates and Odysseus, and we should remember that Odysseus, for Homer, was the one who bashed this ugly, repulsive sort of sub-figure, was constantly producing a dream world and insisting on it, dreaming things up and insisting on it, in order to derange the soldiers who were involved in this siege of Troy. So Odysseus cracks his head in with the scepter. Its power never dies, Homer says. The scepter of kings. And I think even probably Agamemnon, king of kings, would have to hold the scepter in order to, when he's holding sway at court, or when he's wield the scepter is much better, right? Voltum. But seen that way, we have this situation where Hegel has to constantly will his system to be the truth, to be the efficacious speech, which tells us rationally what the thing is. Rationally here means rationally here in Hegel is still sort of like in the memory of that there's a distinction to be made between natural history. You go, you look around, you're a bird or something, you make observations, and something else like dialectic in Plato, but in Thomas, where it becomes really keen, and which sort of sets up Hegel, disputation, this Summa Theological style disputation, which is really just one guy talking to himself, giving arguments back and forth. That's Hegel is sort of Hegel's rationalism is like an intensification of that, but still within the consciousness that there's another thing called natural history where you go out and observe stuff, but trying to sort of glue them together. But so from Nietzsche's point of view, we have to say Hegel has to keep willing the system to be the truth in a certain way, willing it to make an indelible mark on his moot, on the courage of his being, of his Dasein, on its Zuhanden. So I'm being expressionistic a bit. I'm going, obviously these are almost nothing of what I've said is Hegel says that explicitly, but it seems, my claim is, all this seems to be intelligible, and it seems like if Nietzsche is the doctor and Nietzsche is etiologizing, every etiology is a sort of micro-récit or micro-narrative, and he's telling the story saying, well, all this stuff is going on within Hegel, right? All this stuff is holding sway within Hegel. It's Bildung. And then what Heidegger is saying is, But wait a second, didn't Nietzsche tell us there's this sort of randomness with which these projects befall us? And then he says, Heidegger is kind of saying, actually, the Gelassenheit is a situation where we're not embarrassed by we're at ease, but it's not because we're numbed. It's not because we're, like that song, Comfortably Numb or something. It's rather the Gelassenheit is like, we're in the position to really be at ease, like Agamben would be if he was speaking his own language.